Hey, Sarah from Root School here. So I want to talk to you about some early spring plants that will often come up in your garden or generally disturbed areas that are really good to know. So we're going to be talking about stinging nettle, dandelion, and yellow dock. Right now I'm sitting amongst some really early stage stinging nettle. This comes up pretty quickly in the year and does well with competing with grass. It's one that it kind of rides the line between the garden and then the edge of the garden. A lot of times I find it just on the outside of people's gardens, so it has an association, but I'm also one to find it in sort of fields, along rivers and thickets, and it's pretty common, which makes it a great plant to get familiar with and a great plant to utilize. So when we're looking at stinging nettle, there are a couple of identifying features, the most obvious one being that it has stinging hairs that can be pretty mild to pretty intense, and it seems to have a really individualized reaction. Some people handle it no problem, some people they'll throb for days. I am not one to judge. I kind of enjoy the tingling sensation, but I keep that pretty limited and don't necessarily indulge too heavily in that. But it's a great plant to know, and that's a good giveaway detail. So what we're seeing in its early stages right now are these stiff stems that are covered in hairs and these opposite coarsely toothed leaves as they move up the stalk. And so you can see I'm relatively comfortable touching it. I'm doing so in a gentle manner. But what's great about stinging nettle is that it covers edible, medicinal, and utilitarian uses. So its edibility I find to be really delicious. Like if there was a taste of green, I would define that by stinging nettle. And its medicinal qualities are rich and numerous, but what I really seem to lean towards is the fact that it's such a nutrient powerhouse and very mineral rich, and so generally like good for strengthening the body. There are other applications to it. You can get more nuanced, but as far as like how I really bring it into my life is through its like powerhouse nutrition. So something that's really good to eat, something you can make vinegars out of, really apply to your life in simple ways. If you come upon a patch and you want to try some of it, and you're feeling bold, if this is new to you, you can pinch the leaves. And so you'll see I'll kind of like boop boop come in gingerly, and I'll just pinch the tops. And I like to pinch plants where the leaf axils are, so the lower leaves were just growing right here. And they tend to have more growth hormone, and so they heal themselves a little bit quicker. I'm not trying to just like rip leaves in half. So I'm particular about that. And I pinch these young tops off. And so these should be less fibrous. You'll see that they have these hairs, and those are the stinging hairs that create such a reaction. But if I want to eat one of these leaves, what I can do is make a tight little package. And so I tend to fold it back on itself, fold it over, fold it over, fold it over, and I make this tight little package, and I pinch it, and I just throw it in the back of my mouth towards my molars and chew away. And I don't find that I get stung. I did get pretty casual, and I was just like sticking leaves in my mouth, and I definitely got stung. So I think it's a really good spring nibble. I think they taste so great. They're so good. And if you want to take them home after harvesting a bunch of the tops, you can cook them, and that moisture and heat are gonna knock down that stinging effect, so you can eat them without fear of stinging your mouth. And then you can apply any sort of culinary techniques and make kind of like creamed greens or beautiful nettle soups, and there's so many recipes out there that you can take a look at. So whether it's like a simple nibble or a beautiful recipe, nettles are really worth having in your diet, and I think everybody would benefit. I try to avoid generalisms. Everyone's going to benefit from dark leafy greens, and so this is a plant that could really benefit you and is common enough that's good for you to harvest and feel good about. So edible, medicinal, and utilitarian value of nettle is very high, and is a plant that's worth getting to know, and I hope you find some. Here we have this young Basal Rosette of yellow dock. Sometimes people call it curly dock, Rumix crispus, either way. And what I look for is this basal rosette, so all these leaves are radiating out from this one central point at the ground. And we have these lance-shaped leaves that are pointed at the tip, and they have these really significant, here I picked this one leaf, really significant curl going on, which is so beautiful. Another way that's just a familiar visual key is that it has these reddish colorations here. So it kind of has this rusty look to it. I like yellow dock for a number of reasons. I like it for its edibility, and I also like it medicinally. So edibility wise, the young leaves are pretty good. They're pretty good after you cook them. They're like, good when you eat them raw, in my opinion. So it's about recognizing those young leaves that's really important. So we have this basal rosette here. We can clearly see that these leaves are more mature than these leaves. And what we want are the youngest of leaves. They're going to be the least fibrous, the least bitter, and the most palatable, therefore. So sometimes it's very obvious based on its color. It's lighter green. And then what's really kind of neat to me is that you can see these pleated folds in it. So the young leaves are held in this sheath, and you can pull them out, and it has this really mucilagenic quality. So this mucilage is, I think, one of the best remedies for stinging nettle, and they often grow near each other. I did not plan this. This is just how it goes. But this mucilage is really soothing to the skin. Ooh, another little baby leaf. And just rubbing it on wherever you're feeling that sort of like from the stinging nettle, this is really, really magical almost. So I've just removed this leaf from the sheath, and you see it has these tight pleats in there, and you can unfurl them if you so desire. But you're still gonna see these pleats in leaves that are slightly more mature, and if you still see the remnants of the pleats, you can see this vertical line that isn't the midrib, this vertical line that's moving through the leaf. If you're seeing those, then they're still good to eat. So no matter what size you're looking at, if you can still see these freshly unfolded leaves, ooh, look at this cutie, then that's something worth harvesting. So young leaves of yellow dock are good to eat. You can eat them raw. They have like a bitterness in there, but I will say that cooking these with a little bit of butter and salt is so good, and it really just like transforms and steps up into a whole other experience of eating them, and you get a little bit more of that like lemony quality kicking in, and goes from like a to like a really good green to eat. So you know, there's wild edibles, but then there's also preparing them and having a knack in the kitchen, and if you work well in the kitchen, it's going to really support you experimenting and trying new greens and wild edibles at large. So I really encourage that. Medicinally, I use this for the root, and I'm going to pull a root up, but it has this beautiful yellow coloration to it. So I think of the root in two different ways being helpful. One is that it's iron rich, and so you'll often see these yellow dock syrup concoctions, and that iron and this red rusty coloration that we see on these leaves is just a really great tie-in to always remind me of that. And that it also is a really gentle laxative that's not habit forming. So if you or a loved one is dealing with any sort of constipation, you can take some tincture of the root or tea if you can handle some really bitter flavor compounds, and usually it'll get things going. Really good for the body, dark leafy greens, good to keep your system moving along, and worth harvesting in the early spring. Often found in your garden. So I'm going to dig this yellow dock root, and I'm going to excavate the earth around it. But I will say, of all the roots, it tends to let go pretty easily, which is nice. You get something like wild carrot, it's going to hold on, or burdock, hold on pretty tightly. I have a feeling this root's big. So I'm excavating the soil so I can get like a nice handle. And Its root is giant. Oh my god, this root is so much bigger than I thought. So I know yellow dock is a biennial, and it's in the buckwheat family, Polygoniaceae, and it produces a ton of seed. It produces a ton of this like three-sided seed that's really classic to that family, and oftentimes you'll be finding old mature plants with seeds next to their young first-year Basal rosettes. And so as far as just creating abundance for this plant, it's really easy to dig roots up and create a bunch of roughed up soil that you can knock seeds into and create a continuous loop that's just a benefit to you as well as the plant. And is a great direct means in which you can support its growth cycle. But anyhow, nice good sized root out of this plant. Ooh, a little brittle there. Has a slight yellowish coloration there in it. And a really bitter taste profile to it. But this is yellow dock. It's great. It's a great plant to know. So we've moved to the old potato beds where we're seeing a lot of dandelion come in. And here I'm recognizing, again, a basal rosette. So leaves radiating out from this one central point on the ground. And we're looking at leaves that are variously like cleft and lobed. There is a high degree of variability in dandelion leaves, which is pretty remarkable. You know, look at, say, for example, this to this. There's a broad range of differences. So if you're already familiar with this plant, great. And if you're not, we're going to talk a little bit more about it in detail again in a later video, as the flowers are not that far off from emerging. But we're seeing how these lobes are largely pointing down. It's much longer than it is wide. And we're seeing the starts, the flower heads, very beginning, right in the center of that basal rosette. So I think the theme right now is garden plants, and it's also dark leafy greens are good for you. This is the theme as well. And dandelions are really great. They're really great for you, and they're great to eat. And they are bitter. So not everybody likes them right away. This is not something that you're going to give a kid who's going to be like, this is amazing. And a little bit of culinary skills can really help, again, transform this into something that's quite delightful. And I really like these as both a salad and as well as a pesto, and find that that's like really easy and enjoyable to take. So everybody knows how to make pesto, making pesto with dandelion leaves. As a salad, you can always just add it into whatever salad you're making. And in the spring, that's a lot of fun when you can work with so many different plants to add to a salad. And then there's the really classic hot bacon grease drenched wilted greens salad. That's so good. So good. So get to know dandelion, find dandelion. You might be in a warmer place where they're already in flower, but very, very common and abundant in these sort of like disturbed zone waste areas, what that is. The root medicinally is used as a tincture. That's just a beneficial bitter, good for the liver, so much more. We're really just sort of loosely covering those elements here. But good bitter to incorporate into your life if you are inclined. And then there's the classic Dandelion Roasted Tea. So I'm just pulling this root up right now. It doesn't come up quite as easily as yellow dock, although that was a hunker. Long, skinny taproot. The root is really bitter, but if you are to chop it up roughly and throw it in the toaster oven or your larger oven for, I kind of go by smell more than time. I'm just gonna like say 10, 20 minutes, maybe a little longer. You're gonna get this rich, sweet aroma, and the sugars are gonna be turning into fructose, and they're gonna make for a much lovelier drink than if you didn't roast them. And you can then use that in a sort of like a decoction in a tea and have sort of the beneficial properties of dandelion in a more delightful drink. You can also add other things to it, maybe even sweeten a little bit. But dandelion has many different properties. It's really good to know. You want to be able to tell the difference between this and chicories and lettuces, although none of those are going to kill you. But again, we'll talk a little bit more about it botanically later on.